Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another Peaceful Solution class. I just want to remind everybody, thank everybody for coming out, and remind everybody that if you're watching online or here and you don't have a book, you can use the PDF download that's on the Facebook page, the official Peaceful Solution Facebook page. And it's the teacher's manual, and you can follow along with everything that we're going over in the book. We're in the character unit, the junior high book, and we're in chapter 3 here, talking about influences and how what you value and imitate is what you practice. The things that you value in others, the things that you value in your family, in friends, in your environment, the people around you, you imitate those things and you begin to practice those things, and that starts to develop or helps to fuel what becomes your character. So these values are very, very important when it comes to building your character and in terms of who you become, whether you become a positive person or a negative person, what you value does. And we use the acronym here, VIP, which means value, imitate, practice, but also means more commonly known as very important people. And what makes somebody an important person? Think about that throughout this class. What actually makes somebody an important person, a useful member of society, a helpful member of society? Well, it's what they value and the way they treat society, the way they treat the environment around them. And that's, how you become more important, more very valuable. You become proficient at helping society. And in order to become proficient at helping society, you first have to be able to control or run your life properly. You have to control what you value and determine that you're valuing the right things. That's what we're talking about in this chapter here. Just to briefly recap what we covered in the last class, or what Chris covered in the last class, is there's a lot of things that you could potentially value in society today. There's a lot of potential role models, a lot of potential influences, or they are influences that you could potentially take in all throughout society, and they're being thrown at us from all directions. And without the right guidance or the right guidelines to base your values on, you can easily be misled and do some pretty crazy things. And there's role models, singers, sports players, movie stars, all kinds of people and things that we could potentially follow. So what makes one right, what makes one wrong, etc., etc. Let's talk about that. In the last class, he made a very great point, I thought, when he was talking about family and friends, and how when you become a certain age, I would say maybe 1 to 4, you're around your parents most of the time. You really value what your parents have to say because they're forming you. They're forming you into who you are, and that's who you're around the most. As you get older, you start veering more towards friends and other influences, other people in society, which isn't necessarily bad, but can have bad implications. I mean, even your parents might have bad implications, depending on the environment that you're in. But you can start leaning towards all kinds of craziness because you want to experience things, and a lot of times that experience is not the best teacher. And that was a very great point that he made last class, talking about how you can learn things through education, or you can just as easily learn things by going and trying them out and experiencing them. And oftentimes, like jumping across those beams on a 110, story tall building, you could end up falling to your death. And many people do go through life learning through experience and end up, in a sense, falling to their death. So let's go ahead and go to Lesson Plan 3, page D, in the character book. And we're talking about these influences. We're on section 4 here. And we're talking about what's important to you. It's normal to value family, friends, and having fun. And there's nothing wrong with valuing your friends. There's nothing wrong with valuing your family. There's nothing wrong with valuing fun or enjoying yourself, as long as it's in a positive way. In fact, you should, throughout your life, try to enjoy the things that you do. It's very helpful. It's very motivating. And you should find that joy in doing positive things that are helpful to yourself and to others around you. And if you find joy in those things, you're having fun. And it's very important to do that, and it's great to value those things. However, those values should not conflict with obtaining our positive character, which should be really the main bottom line goal in our lives, is obtaining that positive character, becoming positive people, so that we can, A, be positive for ourselves, but also help everybody around us. So on page 59, it talks about only 10 and 12 and charged with robbing a bank. Now I want you to put that in perspective. You know, there's a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old. They've lived 1 decade, you know, and the other one a little bit more, and they're being charged with robbing a bank. So there was some really bad equations that occurred in their life that led up to this point. You know, something went terribly wrong. And, well, I say something went terribly wrong. It could be something very subtle that occurred that led them down this path, too. So it might not have even been extremely wrong, but something wrong led them to this path. Let's talk about how they got there. We talked on page 58 about values, how people can value friends so much that they do anything, even things that are dangerous or immoral, to keep that friendship. Let's go ahead and read this article here. 2 young girls are accused of trying to rob a bank Friday around 1:45 p.m. Police said the suspects, ages 10 and 12, walked into a bank and told the teller they were armed. It was reported that they displayed a note that said, "We don't want to hurt anyone. Just put $2,000 in the bag and we'll be on our way. I have a gun in my pocket, but like I said, I don't want to hurt anyone." And I would dare say they probably didn't want to hurt anybody. I mean, you know, they're that young, and for them to actually want to hurt somebody is interesting. And so they might have had a little bit of morals, but something led them to where they were willing to take this extreme to rob a bank. The girls planned to rob the bank and run behind a nearby Foodland supermarket where they would change clothes to avoid being recognized by witnesses. Then they were going to take the stolen money to a nearby department store where they had set aside clothes and supplies that they wanted to buy for the upcoming school year. You know, that's so interesting because they wanted to do a positive thing, buy clothes and supplies for the school year, but they were going about it in an extremely negative way. It's also been reported that the girls, who are not being publicly identified because of their ages, came up with the plan after watching television shows and movies with similar plots. And that's something I want you to pay such close attention to right there. Because looking back on the movies and TV shows that you've watched, maybe some crime shows that show the flip side of it, where, you know, people are getting arrested for crimes and police are chasing people and they're going into detectives and, you know, showing how they investigate these things. That's one angle from it, but then there's also another angle where the quote-unquote bad guy, the criminal, is promoted as the hero in the movie. And there's several of those that I'm sure many of y'all have seen and witnessed, where the person, his smarts are being shown by being able to evade the cops really well, or come up with these intricate plans to rob the bank or pull off this heist in such an intricate way. And it is quite incredible how they can do this, but they're doing it to promote that person. Now think of somebody who's 10 years old or 12 years old, or if you are 10 and 12 years old, and how impressionable the mind is, especially at that age. Something that's being glorified, it's super cool that they can pull this off, and it shows all the little intricate ways that you can do it without getting caught. Puts a very powerful impression in that mind. Hell, can put a very powerful impression in the mind of an adult. So how much more would it put an impression in the mind of a young person who simply needs the money? They see that as a pretty viable way to get $2,000 to buy these school supplies that I need and clothes, and then they go carry it out. That's the potential danger of the vast array of influences that we have in the world today. So how do you avoid these influences, or how do you learn to understand these influences so that you know what you should act on? Finishing this story, it says the 2 girls were charged with bank robbery and were being held at Schumann Juvenile Detention Center in Pittsburgh. And that's from the PittsburghChannel.com. So take a moment to think about the depth in that story there, though. You have 2, not even teenagers yet, who have been influenced so much by media to the point to where they will go and act on it and believe that it's okay, probably understanding that it's wrong or accept it as wrong by society, which because it is wrong, stealing is wrong. So they go and try to do it in a sneaky way. They don't want to hurt anybody. They have a gun, but they don't want to hurt anybody. Just give us the $2,000. We'll be on our way so that we can buy school supplies and clothes. They even had a plan to change behind the store so that nobody would recognize them. Pretty intricate plan. So what got messed up there? Let's talk a bit more about these influences. They're all around us and they can affect the things that we value. Now, we've talked briefly, and we'll talk even more in the advanced series, about a value system. A value system. And it's very important to have this value system because it helps you to weigh your values. It helps you to weigh your values. Positive character, maintaining your positive character, or not doing anything that compromises your positive character should always be the most important value to you. Then there's other things like friends, family, money, being accepted, etc., jewelry, school. There's a lot of things that you can possibly value. But if you value money, for instance, more than you value your positive character, you would do something like these young children did in order to get that money. If you value a car, for instance, which there's nothing wrong with valuing, or a house, or whatever, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you value that more than you value a positive character, you'll be risked doing something negative to achieve that goal. So you have to have that value system, and you have to rank your values in a moral order of importance. And the influences that are around us have the potential to skew what we believe is okay or acceptable. That's why it's so important to understand them. Page 60 here. Influences are all around us. Your values, remember those values were talked about on page 6, what they are, and in fact we can go back there briefly to just refresh our memory. They're what you believe in or feel strongly about on page 6, values, and they play a key role in developing your character, and then we talk about the value system that we talked about. So your values play such a key role in developing your character that you must be aware of how influences affect those values, affect the things that are important to you. An influence is something or someone that has the ability to affect your attitude. What is your attitude? Your attitude is your demeanor, the way you feel and the way you are acting because of the way you're feeling in that specific instance. Your way of thinking, the way you feel, is largely all the way determined by the way you think. So your thoughts affect your feelings. And the way you're behaving. So an influence is anything that can affect the way you are, either in the present moment or in the future. Anything that can affect the way you are. Have you ever been in a hailstorm and felt like you were getting hit from every direction? How many of you have been in a hailstorm? Think about that. It's a pretty crazy feeling. Or even a rainstorm where it's raining really hard. Or how about a batting cage and the ball machine went haywire? Whether you realize it or not, you're constantly being bombarded with influences. Everything you hear, experience, and see, as well as every interaction and conversation that you're a part of, have the potential to change the way you think and feel about the things you value. So you might underline that word everything. Should underline that word everything because it's easy to sort of underestimate the power of the things around us. So literally everything you hear, experience, and see can affect you. You know, if you're in a store, for instance, it's easy to, maybe you have practiced over and over, to focus on getting what you need to get and getting out. Especially in this time of the pandemic that we're in and everything, that's something you really need to practice doing. Just getting what you're getting and get out if you have to go into the stores, for instance. But it can be very easy to get caught up on a new product that you see or that you don't have the money for or you have no business trying to get. Or a distraction in these areas. And you might even have practiced this over and over. But you can get so, I guess you could say, complacent with the fact that you've practiced it to where you just forget the fact that you need to continue practicing it. And you can get distracted very easily. Not just at the store, in society as a whole. Driving down the highway or on the internet or anything. In society, it's easy to get distracted if you don't keep in mind that everything around you has the potential to affect you. And if you allow it to affect you, or if you become weakened in any kind of way, even just by ignoring the fact, it can affect you in a negative way. It can affect you in a very negative way. It can change the way you think, it can change the way you feel, and it can change the way you act, if you allow it to. So how you are influenced can affect what you value or motivate you to create new values. For instance, one day a special speaker came to your school. During assembly, she talked about the need for more young people who would like to study hard and become involved in a special program where they could travel to another country to study for a semester. You were so interested in this traveling, that you learn to value the concept of getting great grades and of traveling to a foreign country. And that's what many people value travel, and travel is great. I mean, right now it's become quite an issue to travel because of the pandemic that we're having. And the fact that people aren't following the rules for the, it can be easily spread, very easily spread, and you have to be careful of that. But, traveling is a great desire to have. So they desired to travel, to see places and learn things about different countries, so they got great grades. That was a positive way that they were influenced. Their values shifted in a positive way. Influences can come in all different sizes. They can be positive or negative, subtle or bold. You might underline that word subtle, because a negative influence can be subtle. So what do you get if you ignore a subtle negative influence and you allow it to influence you in a negative way? You might not even realize you've been influenced, and then you start doing things in a negative way. So it's very important to be on guard even for those subtle influences, because those subtle, crafty influences can be just as dangerous, just as deadly. But the one thing they all have in common is they all have the ability to affect what you value and affect your character in either a positive or a negative way. In fact, I was teaching a class just this last week, and it was about influences, but it was about finding things funny. And I might have even mentioned this in a previous class we had here, how people often say, well, violence isn't funny. And it's not inherently funny. Or stealing something isn't funny, and it's not inherently funny. However, looking at TV or a movie, for instance, or even any form of entertainment, you got to remember that people who make these shows, these movies, are skilled in the art of comedy. They're skilled in the art of making something funny. And if you allow yourself to be influenced by these things, or if you expose yourself to these things, you can literally, without realizing it, be laughing at people getting hurt, laughing at violence, laughing at things that are totally wrong, and accepting them into your mind. Like, a vegetable just sucking water up through its roots. Because oftentimes when we expose ourselves to these things, we sort of shut our rational mind off and we just allow ourselves to suck in whatever we're watching from the television set. So it's very, very important to remember these things. No, violence or negative behavior isn't funny, but it can be made very funny or very appealing, very attracting. And especially to the untrained mind, it can become a part of their character. So be very careful. Be very careful when you're dealing with these influences. And if possible, don't surround yourself with these negative influences. And in situations where you have to be around negative influences, when you go into society, there's going to be negative influences around you. Have your mind trained to where you can guard your mind to protect yourself from these negative influences. And then be willing to accept positive influences as well. Sometimes we can have a behavior so ingrained into our mind that it's become a part of us, and we're, hesitant to break away from it. But accept when you realize that something's positive. Oh, wow, I could change. I could become better. Be willing to become better. Because the whole mentality of being so stuck in yourself that you're unwilling to change into positive is also just as dangerous as accepting a negative influence. So when you realize something positive, be willing to accept that as well. So let's test our knowledge about influences here. You might be surprised about the variety of influences that affect us daily. And since we're training to be teachers, I'm also going back to the lesson plan here on Procedure 5. We might be surprised at the variety of influences that affect us daily. A lot of these influences have the potential to be positive or negative, and they have the ability to change our perception. And perception is very, very important to realize. You can be in a situation and there can be a dispute, for instance. And you have your point of view, the other person has their point of view, and neither one of you may be wrong. Neither one of you may be right, depending on the circumstance. But your perspective is what changes your point of view of that situation, and it could turn into an argument, a dispute, a fight, a war, if you don't understand the concept of perspective. So those influences have the ability to change our perception, our perspective of what we believe, what we value, and even our actions. We're going to focus on 4 influences that are especially pertinent to this age group, and we're going to talk a bit more about what those are. And they're movies and television, songs, video games, and peers. But let's go ahead and go over our knowledge about influences here. Which of the following are influences? If you have your book, go ahead and take this exercise. If not, listen to them and understand in your mind which ones are influences. Remember too, if you don't have a book, you can get the PDF from the Facebook page where you're watching right now. So which of the following are influences? And remember what we talked about, how everything around us is an influence. Jobs, community, advertisements, designers, books, songs, commercials, alcohol, school, teachers, movies, environment, styles, drugs, animals, businesses, sports, food, peers, magazines, the internet, odors, video games, media, musicians and singers, religious leaders, movie actors and actresses, TV, family, billboards, colors, politicians, and friends. Now, looking at this list of things, some people might say that only a few of them are influences. If you really think carefully, all of them are influences. They are all influences. And remember what we talked about, how everything around you is an influence. Now, a lot of people might overlook things like colors as being an influence. And we'll talk a bit more about how colors are influences, but colors are influences. In fact, I think everybody can agree on, around Christmas time, especially here in the United States, how the color red is a very prominent color. If you go to a lot of malls, a lot of shopping centers, red is everywhere. Red carpets, a lot of soft drinks, a lot of products that they want you to buy are red. Why? Red promotes hunger. It also promotes the desire to buy merchandise, and that's a proven fact. So colors can be influences. A lot of times they use yellow or primary colors in schools, for instance, to promote learning. A lot of different colors are said to soothe powerful emotions. Pink or pastels, for instance, is one some that are used to soothe strong emotions. Blue, for instance, a lot of people associate with being sad, or if the sun's not out for a while and there's a blue overcast, people consider they get gloomy, they get dreary, they might get sad. So colors are very powerful and they can influence us in different ways. And it might even be wise to understand the colors that you're placing around you and how they're influencing you. Not that one color is bad and one color is great per se, but understand their relation to you and how they affect you. Odors. Some people might say that's not an influence, but for instance, if you smell something that brings back a memory, that can affect your mind in a certain way. Animals, for instance, are also influences. They can make you joyful, or they can trigger you to be joyful. So all these things are influences. Jobs can be influences. The community around you is definitely an influence. It affects the way you think, affects the way you feel. And advertisements, that's the whole purpose of advertisements, is to influence you. To influence you into buying a product that you either didn't know about or didn't know you needed. And you might not need it, but they've now convinced you that you should get it for whatever reason. That's what an advertisement is for, is to influence you. Designers. That's something to think about too, because product designers or clothing designers, fashion designers, etc., their job is to create a product that is fashionable, or to create a fashion, to create a trend, or to create something that is appealing to the eye, to affect your mind in a certain way. What's an influence? Anything that can affect your mind. So that's an influence, those designers. Very powerful influences in today's society, actually. Interior designers and all of those things. They're affecting your mind. That's the whole reason they're there. Books, very strong influence. This book itself is a very powerful influence. Songs. Songs are such a powerful influence. Music in general is a very powerful influence. They use songs to teach children the alphabet. You use songs to remember things. When put to music, a lot of words can be a lot easier remembered than just saying them outright. Also, songs have the ability to affect your mood. Songs can bring back memories. Songs can make you sad, they can make you joyful based on the chords that are played and the arrangement that they're played in. Music is very, very powerful. You can almost tell a story just with music itself, even without words. So songs are extremely, extremely powerful. Commercials, just like advertisements, are used to influence you. Now, substances, alcohol specifically, or drugs, are extremely powerful influences. Now, why would I call them or why would we call them an influence? Because they're affecting the way you think, and oftentimes impairing the way you think. Now, it's very important to consider, maybe, well, there's nothing wrong with drinking alcohol. Well, who says there's something wrong with drinking alcohol or doing some sort of drug? Why does society have to put some sort of regulations on these drugs? Well, what is your mind? Your mind is literally the organ that runs your body, or your brain, rather, the organ that runs your body. Now, it determines what you do, the way you feel, the way you behave, the way you act, every decision that you make. Why would you want to do something that potentially impairs that organ? You're literally making your actions less predictable, or less, you can't think as clearly about them before you do them. It's a very, very powerful influence, oftentimes a negative influence. School is definitely a powerful influence, and what you're taught helps to form and shape you for the rest of your life. Teachers, the ones that are in the school doing this. Movies, very important, very powerful influence. And why do I say important? Because it's important to realize that, not that you need to have more movies in your life or something, and not important in that way, but important because a lot of times when you watch these things, you shut off the rational part of your mind that's thinking, is this right, is this wrong? And you're just allowing yourself to be entertained. So it's very important to understand that when you watch these things, you're oftentimes allowing all kinds of things to just get dumped into your mind, whether you realize it or not, and they could have a positive or a negative effect on you. Your environment, obviously. Styles. Now, the designers are responsible for the styles in many cases, or these trends that you might see on social media now, or, I guess the people that initiated them are the designers of those trends, those styles. And they are influences, because one kid can do something on TikTok or on YouTube, and next thing you know, it's a sensation, and all of these kids are now doing it because it's now a trend, whether it's positive or negative, for the simple fact that they don't want to miss out that bandwagon that's going by, whether it's positive or negative. A prime example of that was eating those Tide Pods. You remember so many people were eating these Tide Pods, and doctors and medical practitioners were freaking out and saying, why are you doing this? It was very negative, but it was a very popular trend, and people didn't want to miss out on that popularity, even if they risked their life. Or some of the dancing trends that they were doing where they were jumping out of vehicles and all kinds of things. So many negative things can just take off because they're popular, because they're a style or a trend. Drugs, similarly to alcohol, is a very powerful influence. Animals, businesses. Now, what is the job of a business? To provide value to their customers, to provide value to the society, the community around them. And, well, they should be to provide value. I'm sure some businesses are in business and they don't provide value, but their job should be to provide value. Now, how do they share that value, or how do they spread that value? Through marketing. And marketing is the intentional influencing somebody else to buy their product or their service. So that's what businesses do. Sports. I think that's a very self-explanatory one. You see people watching these sports, and they can get so riled up about a specific team and how this team is supposed to win. And if they don't win, they'll riot in the city. We saw that in Baltimore a few years back. I'm sure you've seen people growing up at home, and when they're, especially if alcohol is involved, when their team is winning and how these outbursts of emotion that they have. Sports is a very powerful influence. Food. I want everybody to do this later on this week, or just try this at some point. You're having a conversation with somebody or with a group of people, and it might be getting dull and boring, this conversation to you. Bring up food. Bring up the topic of food, and maybe their cultural food, for instance. And you'll see how lively that person gets and how they get so excited talking about this food. And that's great. There's nothing wrong with that, because food is delicious. And food is great, especially their cultural food. To them, they really like it, and they really want to talk about it, and how to make it, and the spices, and all these things that they can use, and how they have the best chili recipe, or whatever. You hear that. That's what people do. And that there's nothing wrong with that. Food is great, and it's a very powerful influence. In the same way, there's healthy food and there's unhealthy food. And through advertisements, commercials, etc., or through marketing or whatever, you can be influenced to take a trend in food that can totally ruin your health. So it's also important to weigh those influences. Food can be a positive influence or it can be a negative influence. You can overeat food and become unhealthy, or you can eat in proportion and eat a healthy diet and you can be healthy. Peers. Now the peers around you, especially but not limited to a young age, peers are very, very powerful influences because it's our social group and people don't want to be, left out. They don't want to feel like they don't belong. We have an innate desire to feel like we belong to a certain group or to a group of people. Now, if all the people around us or the people that we are friends with are negative, and we have that desire to fit in, if we're not careful, we'll do negative things to fit into that group. So they can be a positive or a negative influence as well. That's why it's so important, if at all possible, and it is possible, to find people that you make part of your social group that are positive people. I'm sure you've heard the saying, you're the sum or the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Spend your time around positive people. And be a positive person yourself so that you can be a positive person that somebody else is spending their time with. Another thing, too, I think is important to point out when talking about peers and the people that you spend the most time with. In this digital age, we have podcasts, we have videos, we have influencers. They're literally, on the topic of influencers, they're literally called influencers. And it's even considered a legitimate job, an influencer, a YouTuber, or some social media influencer, meaning they have strong influence online. If you are listening, for instance, to a certain person for the majority of your day, listening to a podcast or some YouTube video, or you're constantly watching these YouTube videos with this specific person or group of people, they're pretty much one of the people you spend the most time with. And you're becoming, whether you realize it or not, the average of the people you spend the most time with. So if you're allowing one of these influencers, whose job it is to influence you, are they a positive influencer? Are the things that they are doing for fun or for whatever, are they positive? If you're allowing them to just feed your mind constantly, and you're around them as a peer all the time, and you don't even have to be able to reach out to them or say anything to them. They're literally saying things to you all the time because you're watching them or you're listening to them. You'll become the average of the sum of the people that you're around with the most of your time. So be very careful who you're allowing to influence you through these forms of media, because it's very easy to nowadays. Magazines. Obvious influence. That's their job, is to influence you. The internet. Huge influence. And there was even some lectures given here recently about the power of the internet and how to guard yourself on the internet that I'm sure some of you are aware of. Odors. Very powerful influence. We just talked about. Video games. Video games. Now, why are video games so powerful? Because you're literally acting in a certain way. And that sounds very simple. But when you're acting in a video game, sure, it's not real life. It's not real. However, to your mind, you're going through the motions of doing whatever it is that you're doing in the video game. And you can become so engrossed in these video games, especially with the advent of virtual reality and things like that, that's all you're thinking about. And you're thinking and you're doing these actions, whether it's a violent video game, a construction video game, or whatever, and you're actually learning these things and they're becoming a part of your behavior. They're so effective that many recruiters, military recruiters and things like that, actually look at people's video game history as a determining factor of whether they're a great fit for what they're looking for. And there's documentaries out about that as well that you can watch. So video games are an extremely powerful influence whether people admit it or not. They really are. And I'm sure you've seen or heard people who spend hours and hours, or maybe you have spent hours and hours playing video games and not even realizing how time is passing because of just how engrossed your mind is in it. Very powerful influence. Media, and that's all forms of media. Music, TV, entertainment, social media, all forms of media. Musicians and singers, that's their job, is to influence you, literally. Their job is to influence you. Religious leaders, their job is to influence you as well. Movie actors and actresses, and this is something that I think is very incredible to to think about too, because especially young people, but older people as well, tend to look up to these people as role models. Now, not that there's anything wrong with looking to somebody as a role model, but a lot of times we look to their persona that they portray in movies, be it a tough guy or something, as a role model, or even singers, for instance. You like their music, so you look to them as a role model, whether you realize it or not. And then they do something that may be crazy, immoral even, and your mind justifies it because they're your role model. And without realizing it, you're justifying some sort of negative behavior and accepting it into your life even. Just because you like their music or you like their characters that they portray on TV or in movies. So it is important to distinguish that they're playing a certain character, but it's also important to distinguish that it's easy to get so skewed in perspective because of your idolizing a certain person. And there's no short of the scandals and all kinds of things that are coming out about these celebrities nowadays, because they're people just like we are. They make mistakes. Some of them make some very bad, negative decisions. And if you idolize these people, it's easy to take sides and put yourself in a position that's immoral. TV, family, very powerful influence. In fact, the formative influence in our life for most people. Billboards, colors, politicians. If you look at the latest election that we just had, that's a prime example of how politicians can be huge influences and get people to do things they wouldn't normally do, or get people to believe a certain thing or do a certain thing or feel a certain way. Friends. And it's very important. Friends are important. And it is important to have positive friends, because they'll help you, they'll support you when you're feeling down, and when you might not be as prone to make a positive decision, they can encourage you to make that positive decision. Make the decisions necessary to benefit yourself and to benefit others. Friends are very important, but they can also be negative influences if you choose the wrong friends or if you succumb to negative behavior. So, more than you realize. How'd you do? If you circled all the words, you're absolutely correct. All of these are influences, and they can affect you by changing the way you think, feel, and act. Now, I want you to always remember, it's if you allow them to. You can walk into a crazy situation, and by guarding your mind, turn around and walk the other way and refuse to be a part of it. And that's something that somebody I really admire told me even from a young age, and it's difficult for a lot of us to, and it was definitely difficult for me, especially at the time, to understand you don't have to fit in to a certain scenario. Even if everybody around you is doing something crazy or lying or gossiping about somebody or doing something that you know is wrong, you have every right to walk away and not be a part of it. You're taking care of yourself by doing so, and then you're taking care of anybody who looks up to you and the people that you're around. You have every right to say what y'all are doing is wrong. Even though it makes you the weird one or the odd one out, you have every right to do so. And it's actually very powerful to start building that as a habit. Because you are in control of yourself. You control yourself. You're in charge of yourself. And if you make that decision and realize, that's self-respect, by the way, to realize that you're in control of yourself and can make those positive decisions. If you realize that, it gives you the power to not be influenced by negativity, because you can literally walk away or tell them that, no, what you're doing is wrong and I'm not going to have anything to do with it. And keep moving forward with your life. And there's nothing wrong with that. And it's also very important, even among your friends. Even among your friends. And you're being the positive friend by standing up for what's right. But the power of friends, the power of those people around us is so powerful. And you have to be able to understand that and then deal with it appropriately. So knowing what you value will help you to decide what you allow yourself to be influenced by and what to ignore. Because those influences come at us from all directions, just like a hailstorm. Some influences are subtle on page 62. Some influences are subtle. So subtle, in fact, and that's why I told you to underline that word, because it's very important to realize just how subtle they can be and just how powerful a subtle influence is. You could go through your whole life and not realize that they're influencing you. That's pretty powerful. And subtlety is powerful. The foods you eat, for example, have an incredible amount of influence over the way you think, feel, and behave. Improper foods that were never meant to be eaten can affect the way you think in a negative way. Now, I want to pause there just for a second. because we talked about food and how powerful of an influence it is. A healthy food can be a negative influence just as well if you overeat it. Everything has its proper amount of moderation that it deserves. And it's up to you, up to all of us, to be very educated as to what foods we're eating, how much we're eating of them, etc. Because, yeah, something can be healthy. Water is healthy. But you can drink so much water, you can kill yourself. It is possible, in an extreme, sudden amount where you drink 5 gallons of water at once to win a contest or something like that. You can literally kill yourself. So understand that just because something's healthy doesn't mean you should eat a ton of it. You should eat it in moderation. So food can be a very powerful influence. The desire to eat can be a very powerful influence. Food tastes great in general. That's a powerful influence in itself. So you want to eat it. That's fine. But on the other hand, foods that are unhealthy are even stronger influences in many times because they can actually affect the way you think in a negative way. And you might not even realize it. That's why education is so important, to understand what foods are healthy, what foods are unhealthy, and why, the effect that they're having on your body. You can be perpetually sick and not realize it. Just understand that you're not feeling well, or you're not feeling 100%, or you might not even have felt 100% at a time that you can remember because you're eating some unhealthy food for most of your life. So it's important, and of course talk to your health practitioners and your doctors and things like that when you go and put new things into your body that you're unfamiliar with, so you know whether they're healthy or not. And do your research too. That way you know whether they're healthy or not. Because your mind has to be working properly for your body to be working properly. And your body has to be working properly for your mind to be working properly. The only way to get there, your body is literally made up of the food that you eat and the things that you put into it. So the only way to get there is by eating healthy food that maintains balance throughout your body and makes sure everything's functioning properly. So food is a very powerful influence, both from the fact that you want to eat it, and also it can literally affect the way your mind operates. Excessive use of only foods with little nutritional value will keep you from growing and developing mentally to the best of your ability. And it would be easy to spend, the rest of this class talking about health and what's healthy and what's not and why. But do research on those things. That way you understand what they are and why they're important to have. But keeping your body healthy is so, so important. Did you know that colors also influence you? And take a look at that picture there. There's a whole bunch of things there. You got some dairy products and eggs, some bread, chips, chocolate, watermelon, candy, and broccoli. And might even say that all are healthy in moderation, or that they're not going to hurt you. Maybe a lot of people would say soda is very unhealthy, and many sodas are very unhealthy. So take that into consideration as well. But, eating a balanced diet is healthy. Colors also influence you. Some colors are noted for being calming and soothing. For example, whites and pastels are used in hospitals to calm the sick. Nurses and doctors also wear whites and pastels for the same reason. Bright colors are said to influence learning, and hence daycare centers and other institutions for early learning use bright primary colors such as yellows, blues, and greens. Advertisers are especially aware of how colors influence us. The color red stimulates our appetite for food and merchandise. We talked about that. And a lot of holidays have certain colors associated with them for certain reasons. And you can do your research on those and why they are. Also, people who make movies, or specifically color graders, for instance, people who color grade movies, or even the directors of the movies, place colors in certain places and in certain ways to influence the mind. And a certain scene, for instance, the next time you watch a video or a cinematic piece of some sort, pay attention to the colors. One that's done well. Pay attention to the colors. And oftentimes, when there's a cheery, joyful thing going on, you'll have brighter, more reds, more yellows, more warm colors. It might be sunny, etc. And then when something sad occurs, the whole weather might shift. It's now raining, cloudy, and gloomy, and you have more blues. You have wintry colors, calm, cool greens, blues, etc. And it, whether you perceive it or not, shifts the mood. The music might shift, but along with the music, the colors also shift. Somebody might walk from a fairly neutrally colored place into a place where there's a bunch of red flashing, or red and orange, and you sense danger. Colors are very, very powerful, and people who make these movies, these pieces of entertainment, know that, and they use that to their advantage. And they're very subtle, once again, especially if you don't realize what's going on. Many restaurants, back on page 62, use red carpets and red tablecloths. During the Christmas season, red is the primary color used in decorating department stores. It encourages shoppers to spend, spend, spend. And as a store owner, that's exactly what you'd want. You'd want them to spend money with you. So you put colors in there to be advantageous to you. So here we have a comic down at the very bottom of the page. It says, wow, look at all the pretty red decorations. Suddenly, I feel like I just have to buy something, the other person says. Yeah, me too. Let's buy food. I'm hungry. Without even realizing that they were influenced by the color to buy food. You know, and another thing too about sodas, I'm sure you're familiar with how many sodas have this bright red or this deep red scarlety color as their main color. And it promotes the desire to drink it and the desire to buy it. It's a color associated with merchants and merchandise. So some influences we know or we perceive pretty intuitively, pets being one of them. If many of you are pet lovers, how many of you are pet lovers or have pets? Okay. Pets are and there's nothing wrong with that, pets are very powerful influences. You're probably aware of how your pet influences you. They've been known to have a calming effect on people, and their funny antics can make us laugh even when we're feeling down. Science has also realized what pet owners have known all along, that a pet can be your best friend. I was reading an article last week, or I ran across it briefly, about how, and dogs are oftentimes described as man's best friend. But this guy, he had a leg injury, and he was limping. And his dog was also limping. So he took his dog to the vet and spent, I believe it was over $400 to get this dog's leg repaired. And there was nothing wrong with the dog. The dog, out of a sympathetic response, was also limping to just help to, be a friend to the owner. And it was kind of interesting that the dog was doing that. But you can see several different cases where an animal will sympathetically, they call it, react towards what the owner is doing or feeling, etc., in order just to be a friend. So that's very interesting. Animals are now used to help lift people out of their feelings of depression. They're used in nursing homes and at special times in children's hospitals. And that's very interesting because there's a pretty widely psychologically accepted theory that a lot of times when somebody is depressed, the act of them helping somebody else or helping something else can help to bring them out of that depression. And a lot of times that depression is caused because they literally don't feel fulfilled. And you can receive that fulfillment from helping other people. So having a pet that they can take care of, help, feed, that's dependent on them, can help to pull them out of that depression. So it's literally a psychological thing that you're actually helping somebody or something else, and it helps to pull you out of that depression because it gives you a feeling of fulfillment. That's a really interesting concept to think about. And for that reason, they're used in nursing homes and at special times in children's hospitals. There's also a program called Swimming with the Dolphins that has had a remarkable effect on autistic and mentally disabled children. So animals are a huge influence in our lives. And there's animal documentaries where you can, literally watch animals' lives and why they wouldn't even make any money if they weren't such a powerful influence. They wouldn't exist if people didn't like watching animals and what they did. So a very powerful influence. Now, these are sort of neutral influences, meaning they can be positive or negative, but generally neutral. Food, for instance, or colors, for instance, pets. However, there are some influences that are very, very powerful in a negative way. In a very negative way. And it's very important to understand, to be able to identify, and to understand that they are negative and why they are negative. And that's what we're going to get into now. Let's go back to Lesson Plan 3, page D here, in Step 5, and remember that we're talking about movies and television, songs, video games, and peers. Now, I'm not saying that inherently these things are negative. I know I did just mention negative influences, but they have the potential to be negative in a very powerful way. One way that they are negative is by portraying and promoting violence. Violence, step 6 here, is one influence that has a negative effect on our values and our ability to achieve a positive character. We're going to read pages 64 to 65 and talk about how violence is no fun in games. But something that I think is very important to remember, and it's been a huge debate among media creators, and there's even committees that are set to put ratings on these movies and things like that for this reason, about does violence in fictional media or negativity in fictional media have a direct correlation to people's behavior? I'll tell you, the answer is yes, but we can get a lot deeper into that because one theory or one side of the argument is, well, people understand that it's fake, so they automatically dismiss it and it doesn't affect their behavior. The other side of the argument is that, well, whether it's fake or not, the subconscious mind doesn't understand that, etc., 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 and they're putting it into their mind as behavior. But if I want everybody to remember, in fact, the author said this several times, talked about how powerful the subconscious mind is. So in order to understand that, we kind of have to understand what the subconscious mind is, and it's sort of a storage bank of everything that we've ever seen, everything that we've ever done, everything that we've ever experienced. All of the influences around us get stored in that subconscious mind. And what we feed that subconscious mind mostly is what will come back to our conscious mind and trigger our behavior. And our conscious mind has the authority, I guess you could say, to say, no, I'm not going to do this, or yes, I am going to do this. But remember, that's based on your experiences, your values, the things that you've used to influence it. And all those are stored back in your in your subconscious mind. You know, you've stored all of these experiences and things in your subconscious mind. The author has said of the program, and many other people, many other highly respected people in these circles, have said your subconscious mind will always win. Whatever you fed the most into your subconscious mind is what will lead and guide your behavior. So if you're feeding your mind with negativity, especially if you're feeding it with negativity over and over and over through violent video games, which are oftentimes touted to be better because they're more violent, and there's more blood, and there's more action, and there's more offensive language and promiscuous behavior, etc., 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 touted to be a better movie because of that, or a better TV show because of that, because there's more action, there's more drama. If you're feeding that into your mind more and more, into your subconscious mind, what's going to win? That negative behavior. So just remember that and keep that in mind as we go through this, so that you can understand why violence in these sorts of media is so dangerous. Let's go to page 64. And okay, look at the time here. Let's go to page 64 and let's briefly cover this violence is no fun in games. Violence on television, in the movies and in video games, can affect your character in many ways. Many studies prove that as a result of seeing violent shows where aggression is high, teenagers, just like you, and adults as well, become desensitized to the horror of violence, aggression, and the suffering of others. Now, understand that word desensitized. Understand that word desensitized. I don't know how many of y'all have ever run any power equipment, power tools. But a lot of times when you run like a saw, like especially a sawzall or a saw that goes back and forth, or a circular saw or anything like that, there's a strong vibration that your hand goes through, and it feels very off-putting to begin with. But once you use that saw over and over again, you eventually get to where you don't even notice it anymore. Your brain becomes accustomed to it, and you can use the saw with no problems, or the tool, or whatever. That's one angle you can look at of desensitization. You've become desensitized to the strong vibration of the saw that would generally put most people off for the first time. It's the same way with these acts of violence on television, or in the movies, or in media, or when you're exposed to them in general. You see it once. The human body, the human mind is not instinctually okay with seeing somebody else die or somebody else hurt. It's pain, and your mind is not okay with that. However, if you see it over and over and over again, especially in a funny light or in a glamorous light or in a way that's esteemed to be positive, which it's not, you become desensitized to it and your mind becomes accustomed to seeing it. Whether it agrees with it or not, it becomes accustomed to seeing it. And the more it sees it, it might even start to agree with it. That's the process of desensitization. When you see or experience something so much to where you become used to it, you become accustomed to it. In other words, by seeing violent acts repeated over and over again, it may not even affect you, even in real life, to see someone hurt or suffering, because you've seen it so much in entertainment media. This is called desensitization. Here's something else to think about. By viewing violent and aggressive shows, there's a tendency to imitate the behaviors of certain characters. Have you ever seen little children? And I'll go as far as to say, have you ever done this? Running around pretending to be wrestlers or practicing martial arts right after they watch a movie or show on TV. Have you done this yourself? Now, I want you to, if you can't place that in your mind, think of a time when you've watched a movie, like you just come out of a movie theater, or you just watch a movie at home or something. Action hero movie where the hero was touted as being so powerful and he was able to kick everybody else who was the bad guy. And you come out with this feeling of adrenaline, which means that your mind is actually experiencing these things. You come out with this feeling of adrenaline and this feeling of, I can just beat the world, I'm invincible. That itself is showing that you're being affected by this. And I'm sure even maybe at a younger age, you were so impressionized, is that a word? It had such an impression on you that you felt like you could jump off the couch and the table and do these martial arts moves that you've never practiced before in your life, and you could possibly hurt yourself. But now you're jump kicking and flying across the room and maybe fighting with your siblings and things like that because you watched this movie. And it's such a cool thing to do now. That in itself is showing just how easy it is to be affected or influenced by these things. And it's very important, especially as young people, if you see these things, to realize that they're not real. And in many cases, you can very terribly injure yourself or other people by trying to do them. And in many cases, they are negative and can hurt people. Video games are also another source of violence that has been known to have a negative influence on values and character. Video games are a multi-billion-dollar-a-year industry. In fact, if you look at video games and their budgets, it takes a lot to make these things, and then the sales from these things are incredible, and the amount of money that's brought in by these things are incredible. They're now one of the most popular forms of entertainment in many households and attract mainly boys, girls and women too, but mainly boys, and men of all ages. The most popular games involve shooting or martial arts that end with one or more players dying a bloody, painful death. Now, there's even games that have come out even more recently that depict the same thing, killing people, but in a less gory way, because now it's now child friendly because there's not as much realistic blood and things like that. But realize it's literally portraying the same exact violence, the same exact negativity, just in a less extreme way, so it still is desensitizing the mind of now younger people. So, these that involve shooting or martial arts that end with one or more players dying a bloody, painful death. Reports also show that playing video games can actually slow brain development. How do you think violent acts that you see on TV, the movies, and video games affect your character? Now, remember what I said before. It's easy to get complacent about the fact, especially if you're trying to practice a positive character. It's easy to get complacent about the fact that, I guard my mind, I protect my mind, and then indulge in these behaviors because you feel like, I'm strong enough to guard my mind against these things. But why would you put yourself in a potentially risky situation if there's no need to? You know what I mean? There's one thing if you have to go out into a certain environment where you're exposed to these things and you have the proper guards up in your mind. But why voluntarily put yourself in a situation where you're being bombarded by negative influences, especially if you know the danger of them? So don't do that. Don't underestimate the influence that violence can have on your character. And that's where we're going to stop for this evening. But think about these things as you go home and as you continue with your week and your life, about the power of influences. And look around you with new eyes, sort of, and realize that everything around you has the potential to influence you. And not in a paranoid way where you're just freaked out about everything around you, but in a wise way where you're guarding your mind so that you're doing things that are positive and not negative, and you're not being influenced in a negative way. So that's all we have. We're going to leave off on page 64. We're going to pick up on page 65. And the next class is going to be next Sunday at 5:30 Central Time. So everybody have a wonderful week and a wonderful evening.